What is up, Sandals Youth? Hey, I'm Adam Atchison, and I'm super excited to continue our Own It series. We've talked over the last couple of weeks about own your faith, then own your story, and today we're gonna be talking about own your influence. And so our first point, get ready, right? It's sort of mind-blowing, it's really profound. Took me a lot of weeks and months to really develop this first main point. Here it is, you ready for it? You have influence. Influence, you got some, okay? That's a thing for you. And so I wanna jump into a quick story in the Bible about somebody who had some profound influence and who started out in a really extreme kind of way, using his influence for evil, but got in a major work in his life and turned him around. And so in Acts 7, it says this: then they put their hands over their ears and began shouting. Essentially what was happening here was a major leader, one of the first martyrs of the Christian church. A martyr is just someone who has died for the faith. Stephen is being accused. And so there's a lynch mob sort of happening, and they're coming at Stephen, and it says they put their hands over their ears and began shouting like a bunch of kindergartners who don't want to listen to their mom. They rushed at him and dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. His accusers took off their coats and laid them at the feet of a young man. I want you to notice that, a young man. We don't know exactly how old Saul was, but he was a youth. Okay, there was an F, not the TH, the F. He was a youth, Saul was. He was a young man, and Saul was one of the witnesses, and he agreed completely with the killing of Stephen. And so what's very clear here is that Saul was in a position of influence. He was a leader. He was in a place of power. And you might be sitting there thinking like, yeah, that's sort of extreme. You know, I ain't never killed nobody. Well, good on you, first of all. Your youth leads, by the way, if that applies to you here today, they've got a button. It's purple. There's a pink star on it, little green glitter. And it even says, like, I have never killed somebody. So, like, wear that proudly. I'm glad you are not a murderer. But the reason I want to point that out is because here's what God does. God often uses extreme cases, because if he can do it for Saul, he can do it for anybody who's a little bit less of a knucklehead like me and you. And so you too have influence. The second point is this: no influence is bad influence. So if you're like, yeah, I don't know, I don't feel influential, right? Or you know, one of the definitions of leadership is influence. So you could almost just interchange those words, influence and leader. And you can say, I'm not one of those. Well, here's the deal. No influence is bad influence. Matthew 12:30 says it this way: anyone who isn't with me opposes me. And anyone who isn't working with me is actually working against me. Here's the deal. In the economy of God, there is no riding the fence. You're either in or you're out. You're either 100 or 0. And so if you think you're sort of just neutral, that's just not the truth. Revelation 3:16 says it this way: but since you are like lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. And so here's what I want you to remember. This is probably the one thing you're gonna remember and forget the rest, but this is especially for the junior high boys. Don't be a Jesus loogie, all right? Don't be the loogie that Jesus hawks out because you're lukewarm, because you think you have no influence. No influence is bad influence. No influence is bad influence. Next point is this: owning it means no more babysitting, right? You guys are teenagers, man. You know, you're sort of past that age of babysitting. And so I want to just talk about that. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. Here's what I do mean. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells this story. It's a parable, and he gives 3 different people gifts. One, he gives 5 gifts, talents. One, he gives 2, and one, he gives 1. And here's the story of the one when he came back to report to the master who had given him these gifts, these talents. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I know you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth, right? Fear kicked in for his influence. He went neutral. And so here's what happens. He's saying, look, here is your money back. He was babysitting his gift. He was just sitting on it, ready and afraid of what would happen, hoping that when the mom and dad returned, that he could just give it back to him in one piece. He was babysitting his gift. Owning it means it's yours. No more babysitting your gifts and your influence. And then here's what Jesus says in response: to those who use well what they are given, Even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Another verse that speaks to this idea that we can't just babysit our gift, but that when it comes to you giving an account before God, no one is gonna be there to hold your hand. It's you and God, and you're gonna give an account for what you did with your influence. It says this in Romans 14:12. Yes, each of us will give a personal account to God. So finally, I just wanna say this, right? If you have influence, if there is no neutral, it's either you're with Jesus and you're using your giftedness and your influence for good or for bad, and it's yours to own. That's the theme of this series. Nobody can do that for you. It's a choice that you have to make. Then use your influence for good. That's the last big idea I want to share with you. Use your influence for good. I want to pick back up the story of Saul. It says this a couple chapters later, after we get some more clarity about how Saul was looking to destroy the church, it says. It says he was looking to kill as many people as he could who were a part of this new movement of God. But then later it says this, and immediately he began teaching about Jesus in the synagogues. Saul did, saying, he is indeed the Son of God. All who heard him were amazed. They were asking this question, isn't this the same man who caused such devastation among Jesus' followers in Jerusalem? They asked. And didn't he come here to arrest them and take them in chains to the leading priests? Saul's preaching became more and more powerful, and the Jews in Damascus couldn't refute his proofs that Jesus was indeed the Messiah. It's one of the most profound examples of somebody who took their influence, their position, their place, their power, whatever it was, and did a complete 180. And this is, I just want to end with this final verse. It's probably like the most classic youth ministry verse of all. But it captures some ideas about how specifically when you're using your influence for good, especially within the church, God's chosen vehicle to deliver his message of good news, to accomplish the mission on this earth. It says this about how you can use your influence as a young man or woman. Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers, young and old, your peers at school, but also those who are above you. You can influence above. You can do that. Be an example to all believers in what you say. Use your influence with your words, in the way you live, what you do, and in your love, your faith, and your purity. Use your influence for good. And I would ask and challenge that you would actually just do that today. That you would make a choice and talk through what that might mean as you go into your D groups. I'm so glad that I've been able to share with you. God bless you as you move into that next section. Your host is going to come up in just a second and talk a little bit more about this idea of using and owning your influence for good. God bless you guys.